is AI the Antichrist?
I'd say that AI, like any technology, is a tool created by humans. The concept of the Antichrist in Christian theology refers to an end times figure opposing Christ. AI itself doesn't have beliefs.
What's up, everybody? We're back again with we've had some incredible people on this podcast, but you could be the most fun.
Oh, stop it.
Yeah, I was going to say smartest,
you
but...
say that to everybody. I
can I plug this real quick?
Yeah,
sure. I literally, there's like notes on here where I've written
on
it. I don't know why I wrote on it, but this is the sequel to your book, The Problem of God, which I don't know what's better, The Problem of God or The Problem of Jesus.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Both are incredible. And then you have a new one coming out.
Yeah, February. The Problem of Life.
Yeah.
So
I got to see the cover.
Super exciting. Yeah.
So
all about how to find joy, purpose, and meaning in a disenchanted world. It's all about life, all about, pain, your origins, and it's kind of written like those books by Jordan Peterson and these guys right now who are like, I'm going to give you 12 rules for life, 12
I had that book.
So I wrote all the chapters about our human experience, and I realized all of them were basically 11 principles of if you follow these 11 things in life, you will flourish versus flounder in life. The chances are you're going to kill it versus letting life
So you wrote like
it's like
a
11,
version of that?
It's like me saying, do this, do this, do this, do this.
Oh, that's
organized
awesome.
into 5 big subjects and topics. Yeah, anyway, so I'm super excited about it.
I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble for this, but I think Jordan Peterson is just a genius.
Right.
He gets kind of pushback because he will not, definitively say the resurrection is a literal event, right? I mean, I've heard him not deny it. I heard Sam Harris say something to him, and he goes, I'm not saying it's, But look at this question that we have here. Could the resurrection be a metaphor?
Do you want to start reading or listening to the Bible, but you have no idea where to start?
I get the question all the time. I don't know the translation. I don't know where to even begin. That's why we made the 21 Days of Momentum Challenge. How many chapters are in the book of John?
21.
1 chapter a day, small podcast episode. You go through all 21 days. You take the challenge. What happens?
I think your life will be different. You will have hope for your day. You will have a security in hearing the voice of God.
So take the 21-day challenge today on the UNcomplicated app. Just look at the link in description or search your app store. So that's a perfect segue for this question.
Right.
Could the resurrection be a metaphor?
Right.
Take a moment and talk about a literal resurrection of Jesus.
Yeah. Okay. So really important. Obviously, every other faith or most other faiths are based on esoteric principles, spiritual life.
Yeah.
Hey, do this, do this, do this. The great thing about Christianity is it's based on a historical moment, which makes it super vulnerable. If it can be proven to be false, Christianity falls apart. Paul said this, 1 Corinthians 15.
Yeah.
If the resurrection didn't actually happen, we're to be the most
the
pitied of all
ones.
people. Yeah. There is a great story that I heard years ago where there is a church and they had introduced drums in the church service, and the people were scared of the drums. It was a very traditional, Baptist church. And so they had a big gathering of the members, and they all came to complain about the drums. And the one guy got up and he said, if Jesus Christ knew that we had drums in our church right now, he'd be rolling over in his grave. and you're kind of thinking, if Jesus Christ is rolling over in his grave, we got bigger problems than drums in
no
church.
kidding.
We are still in our sins. We're all dead, So there were these ancient myths and whatever, and there's all these weird kind of stories and concepts of rising from death and whatever that maybe even predated Christianity. And we talked about that in one of the class in the course. What we talked about was Jesus just a filling out of an archetype, a mythology based on ancient religions. And the reality is that Christianity's claim is not that this is a metaphor. It actually happened in history. Under Pontius Pilate, 3 days This is why the Gospel of Luke is so obsessed with data, right? This was the ruler. This was the city. This was the village. This was the town. This was the map. The New Testament is obsessed with history, not metaphors. It's not Jesus rose from the dead in your heart, that is who you're talking about. All these, this is like a paradigm for life. It's always better if you die to yourself and rise to, to help people. Christianity has such these great principles. That's not really the crux of Christianity. Right. Christianity isn't, I'm going to give you a death and resurrection metaphor for your marriage and life. Yeah. It's about Jesus Christ actually died, actually rose from the dead. And if that's the case, then we have to move backwards from there and say, what do we do with it? So it's like, there's like a few.
Well, Dr. Jordan Peterson, he's famous for saying, and he didn't make this up, but like, do you believe in God? Well, I act as if God exists, right?
Yes,
but he didn't make that up. That's what, I mean, other people have said that. Like, your life will be better if you live by the principles of God.
Right.
But what if there actually is a God?
Yes.
He actually does come to this earth.
Yes.
God's son, so precious to the Father, really is lays down his life for you. And the Father gives his son. Like, if that's an actual thing, right? Then to reject
everything changes.
To reject that also would be a very heartbreaking thing. So you can't just say act as if God exists.
Yeah, no,
because
it's specific. Generic spirituality isn't enough. You have to get specifically Christian, which is Jesus Christ. Was he who he said he was?
Yeah.
So let's work backwards from the resurrection. There are multiple evidences that the resurrection of Jesus probably happened. And
starting with eyewitnesses?
Eyewitnesses.
Yeah.
People who saw, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, 500 people. And then he says, most of whom are still alive. And that's a very important point to write down because what he's saying, and this is Richard Bauckham talks about this in his book, the Eyewitnesses and the Gospels and the Eyewitnesses, where he says, when Mark just randomly says, you know, hey, Simon, this guy was the father of Rufus and Alexander. The reason he's doing that, why would he do that? It's a signature stamp to say, go and ask Alexander and Rufus because they're still around.
Or maybe like a blind Bartimaeus.
Yeah.
It's not blind guy. Right. It's blind Bart.
Yes.
Which, by the way, if you're Bart and you're blind, your nickname's Blind Bart, I'm guessing, right? Go ask Blind Bart.
Yeah, 100%.
You don't?
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Yes. So, anyways, I'm using that.
Okay,
I'm tucking that away. Okay. That's coming out. If you hear that in a sermon, you know,
go for it. Yeah. Offend as many people as I'm afraid of. I just did.
Yeah. So you have these names, and so when he says most of whom are still alive, he's saying, I want you to go ask the people that are still alive about whether they saw the resurrected Jesus.
Yeah.
This wasn't like other religions. This wasn't Joseph Smith in a room by himself reading some tablets. This wasn't, this was 500 people. This was public. The resurrected Jesus, and he hung out for 40 days, and he did this, and he did this. Crazy. So the evidence, the eyewitnesses. Secondly, the empty tomb, of course.
Yeah.
The fact that the Roman Empire had all the reason in the world to protect that tomb from a revolutionary who wanted to go against them. They had every agenda in the world, put the best Navy SEALs at the stone, make sure it doesn't get, and disciples, these fumbling 12 fishermen, there's no possible way they went up against the Navy SEALs of the Roman Empire. Yeah. There's no possible way they fell asleep and knocked heads. This isn't a cartoon. And they carried them out, and oh my goodness, Jesus rose from the dead. And people say, okay, fine. The appearances of Jesus, the empty tomb of Jesus, all of these are legit. So maybe Jesus, this is the swoon theory. This is literal, like James Cameron has documentaries on Discovery Channel saying, here's my best bet at this then. Jesus Christ didn't really die.
Wait,
James Cameron helped produce.
James Cameron from Titanic.
From Titanic, yes.
Avatar, James Cameron.
Yes.
Oversaw Terminator 1 and 2, James
T2,
Cameron.
the greatest action movie ever made other than Die Hard. Can we agree to that? They're up there. They go back and forth. Okay. So James Cameron, a documentary, Discovery, overseeing it, talking about Jesus Christ didn't really die.
He made a documentary trying to disprove the resurrection?
No, he's going after the bones of Jesus, and they're going and they're saying, we think we could find the bones of Jesus. We could do these ossuaries. And then they come up with these Discovery Channel type shows, come up with these theories about what could have happened to the person of Jesus. And the swoon theory, which is what Islam believes, is that Jesus Christ didn't really die.
Yeah.
He went up on a cross. He passed out a little bit. They took him down.
What about the spear, though, and the heart and the blood?
Well, this is the one thing the Roman Empire knew how to do was kill people.
Right.
They once killed 6,000. They crucified 6,000 people on a single day on a road that went from Vancouver to Seattle, which for most of you no idea where Vancouver is, but that's a long way. Yeah. 6,000 people on a single day. They knew how to kill people. They didn't tend to put guys up on crosses who then they took them down and they went, whew, that was close. And they just walked away.
Yeah.
This is what the Roman Empire did. They were executioners. They were genius at it. So they killed Jesus. They put a spear through his heart sac. They took him down. He didn't, and yet his disciples said, we saw him alive again. Now, here's the third or fourth evidence, depending on what point.
Can I guess it?
Can
I guess it?
Sure.
The martyrs. Who would be willing to give their life?
Who would be willing? Yeah. Yes, exactly.
So, right now we're recording in a studio that's in an office building.
Yes.
And I have a neighbor, and the neighbor came over, and we were talking, and he's not a Christian, and he said, I can't really get on board with this resurrection. I can't really believe this thing. He goes, but I'll tell you what, and he's like about to walk out the door. He's like, I'll tell you what really gets me. He goes, all those people who were willing to die, who were his followers, this is what he said.
Yep.
He goes, that for me, that gets me close, because I'm like, why would they do that?
Right. Why would they do that?
They didn't really see him resurrected.
And
then he came, after we talked about it a little bit, like he's convincing himself. I'm like, yeah. Homeboy came to church that Sunday. He was
beautiful.
Like, because you gets in your head.
Yeah.
You're like, because nobody's going to die for a lie.
No, and not only a lie, not only they didn't see him, they made it up.
Right.
So not only did they lack evidence that he rose from the dead, no. The theory is they constructed the lie. It was the greatest conspiracy theory ever perpetrated upon humankind. A group of people got together and decided to create a religion, and everyone got in the same room and said, let's say we saw Jesus resurrected. And the minute your fingernails start to get pulled off and your child starts to get tortured to death, I'm thinking one of you is going to talk and say, okay,
or
we made it up.
You're Peter, and you're watching your wife get crucified in front of you.
And at some point, someone is going to say, okay, we made it up, right?
Yeah.
So that, and then, of course,
and for what advantage? Like, what would they get out of that?
Nothing. That's the point. You're not going to die for a lie you know isn't true, that you're getting nothing out of. You might die for a lie that you think is true, but not one you're creating, not one you're making up to create. And then the other evidence that a lot of historians point out, too, is the prominence of women, of course, in the Easter story, in the resurrection story. Here was a culture that didn't allow women to give an eyewitness testimony, didn't allow women in a court of law. They carried no social legitimacy. And yet, when it comes to Christianity, at this moment of the empty tomb, where it needs to be the most prominent, if you're making the story up, you have the Sadducees walk in, they're like, I see the empty tomb, Tommy, and then they go, whatever. It's like, no, it's two women, or one woman in one case, arriving and going, oh my gosh, and then she's the first one to preach that Easter sermon. It's women that are the first eyewitnesses, and that just wouldn't allow the Gospels unless it was actually just the way it happened.
I used to look at that, and I would say, if I was going to rewrite history, I would put somebody who was, like you said,
a prominent Pharisee. Yeah, of course.
And then you also look, and let's just call it out. There's kind of discrepancies in the account.
Yes.
In the Gospels.
Yes.
Who's at the tomb, who sees first, how that goes down. And that's another thing where you're like, well, I would probably get on the same page when I was copying some manuscripts over and make it all the same. But historically speaking, when you find manuscripts that have the same theme but a little bit of difference of details, that actually brings a validity.
Yes, absolutely, 100%. Yeah, it's the discrepancies of, and we talked about this in one of the classes in the course, the discrepancy of one angel at the tomb versus two. Matthew says there was one, John tells us there was two. And as many historians have pointed out, Matthew, it's not a contradiction. Matthew was telling us one talked, John was telling us how many were there, but the fact that they have discrepancies, to your point, actually brings legitimacy to it from a historical vantage point of, there was this tension. They clearly didn't get in a room and say, okay, we're going to say two, you say two, I say two, we all say two. They allow this bit of attention.
It wasn't Mary who was eyewitness, it was Mark. Like, you changed it, like,
just make sure,
a little change, and now it's a guy.
This up.
Yeah.
Say two. You got to say two. You know, so all of those reasons, and so much the rise of the early church, all of these things point to, from a historical, and we're talking about like Oxford historians, right? That look, this isn't random Joe Blow in his basement. This is Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard level historians saying the resurrection of Jesus brings so many questions of legitimacy that it probably did happen. And if it probably did happen, now everything changes, because now you got to go move backwards from there and say, my whole life, it doesn't work. You can get on a plane right now and you can go to the tomb of Abraham. You can go to the tomb of Muhammad. You can go to Buddha's tomb. You can go to any founder of any religion, And you can get on a plane and go to Israel and try to go to the tomb of Jesus, but the beautiful thing is it's empty. There's no one in it because he rose, and it created this amazing movement of people. So if Jesus Christ really rose from the dead, we move backwards from there and say, what did he claim about himself? He claimed to be God. I think 36 times throughout the Gospels, he said, I am God, or a version of it. Remember, he
came from heaven.
Yeah. And he said it in ways that, I've had conversations with like Canadians or Americans that go, well, Jesus never said, I am God. I'm like, well, he was a first century Jew. So what he decided to do was say, I am God in every way that they would hear him say it. Right? Because just to say, I am God, think about it this way. For you and me, we would go, okay, I see what he's claiming. But you put him in an Eastern religious setting. We're all gods.
Yeah.
Who cares? You're God. I'm God. That mosquito's God. What does that matter?
If he didn't say I'm God, why did they kill him? I mean, the reason why they killed him was because of blasphemy.
Yes, he made it very clear in his 30 different ways. I'm doing the role of Yahweh, and everything that you think Yahweh does, that's what I do. I'm here to do this. I predated Abraham. I already existed. But I forgive sins. I'm the temple. I'm the bread. I'm from heaven. All of it. So.
What do you say? 36 different ways.
I think there's 36 times in the Gospels or something like that where he just says this. And he does it in ways that sometimes a 21st century American wouldn't immediately recognize. But when you go back, and this is what I think is when you go back, the fascinating thing is when you start to think and study first century Judaism and how they spoke, how they wrote, what their theology was, and then you put Jesus in the center of that, he begins to take on a color that is so beautiful because you begin to realize the reason he chose 12 disciples wasn't arbitrary. It was 12 tribes of Israel, and he's trying to symbolically. The reason he gets baptized in the water in Mark chapter 1 and then goes out into the wilderness for 40 days, and in Matthew, Satan comes and attacks him for those 40 days, and all 3 times he uses Deuteronomy scriptures, which are the story of Israel in the wilderness, failing at the very temptation where Jesus is passing. He's becoming the new and true, better Israel. He goes through the waters of the Red Sea of baptism and then out into the wilderness. He's doing all of these things to say all of these great symbolic realities. I'm true Israel. I'm accomplishing what they were called to do. Now you need to become part of me and my movement.
I'm the second Adam.
I'm the second Adam. Once you start putting all that color into it, it becomes an endless, beautiful well of like theological and spiritual depth, and you're like, oh man, Jesus came to do. He didn't just come and give some pithy sayings,
and that's why
and tell a couple nice stories. This was incredible. Take a whole lifetime to figure this out.
God walked the earth.
Amazing.
He walked the earth, and you say, God never intended faith to be complicated. That's what we say.
Yeah.
There's nothing more uncomplicated than Jesus.
Yes.
What does God look like? Jesus. What would God do if he was here? Jesus.
Yeah.
And then all the ways that you're describing it, even if you don't understand all those layers in Judaism or Hebrew culture or whatever, at the end of his life, he is before Pontius Pilate. And he says, are you king of the Jews? Are you the Messiah? Because if you say it to me, I will kill you. And he goes, yes, I am.
Right.
Even at the very end, he says it. So even if you miss all the things you just described, there's still that declaration at the end. It's the last thing he says before they take him off to, put him to death. And so, I think it kind of brings us to our next question. And I was looking at this before we started. How can I trust the Gospels if they were written after they died? And I think what that means is the authors. Because I was listening to the Joe Rogan podcast the other day, and this guy was so arrogantly saying, oh, this was written, after the disciples were gone, so that's why it's in a different name, and really, Peter wrote Mark and all that, and some of that stuff's true, but my research shows that, these people were still alive. This is 40 AD or 60 AD. This is not, John is still alive. These are eyewitnesses who are, bearing testimony and then putting this down for us to, especially Mark, right?
Yeah, Mark's very early,
Probably written by Peter, right?
Influenced by Peter. Peter's stories and
John
ideas would have influenced the writing of Mark, but Mark's.
I always imagined Peter was a fisherman who was illiterate. And
when you read First Peter in the Greek, it's a mess compared to Luke. Luke is a smart doctor. When you read Luke and Acts in the Greek, it's this very like, hello, welcome to the party, whereas Peter's, first, second Peter is a complete, like, fisherman.
So Mark, that's like 16 chapters. It's the shortest, it's the fastest.
64 AD, 65 AD, somewhere in there.
Yeah. And then you have, Matthew was probably next, right?
I don't know. The order's debatable. Probably Matthew. They're all using influences of each other,
and then Luke, and then
John. So basically, if you want a quick like synopsis of how this works, you have what are called the synoptic gospels,
right?
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and they tell a particular kind of story. They share, 61% of material, and they did, all of those kind of. And actually, I talk about all this in here. There's two chapters on the Gospels in the book, and it goes through all those kind of data. And then you have John, which is a very different kind of gospel, right? You have the synoptics; they all function. Then you have John, very different. But there's some good things about the people, and I talked about this in one of the classes. People pick on John as if it's just spiritual and it's not historical. Craig Blomberg wrote a book called The Historicity of the Gospel of John. He talks about the fact that, did you know that the only reason we know Jesus' ministry lasted 3 years is because of the Gospel of John? Because in John's Gospel, Jesus goes to 3 Passovers. If you just read Mark, you would have no idea how long the ministry of Jesus is. I mean, he doesn't even get born in Mark. He just... Only Matthew and Luke give us the birth of Jesus. Yeah. And so John actually gives us these historical reference points that are actually hooks all throughout.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, Luke gives us a ton of history. Mark gives us none. We're ripping. But the point, to your point, so you look at, in the ancient world, trusted documents were documents that people would write and read 500 years after the events. 1,000 years after the events, Thucydides and Gallic Wars and all these Aristotle. We read these things and we don't question their historicity. In the scope of antiquity, the Bible is trusted because the writings of the New Testament were written somewhere between. People date 1 Thessalonians or Philippians and in some of these Galatians in the mid-50s. So we're talking about 20 years after Jesus. The Apostle Paul is writing his stuff. 30 years after Jesus, Mark is writing his stuff and publishing it. So within a 30 to 40 year span, most of the stuff is written. Maybe John's Gospel and Revelation are a little later. But you have this, within 30 years,
but not that much later because John's alive.
Yeah, John dies at 90 or 90 AD or something. So the point is, it carries a ton of legitimacy from a historical standpoint because the people are still alive who could disprove these stories.
Right. Yeah.
He didn't feed 5,000 people, which actually probably meant 10,000.
Yeah.
Because we were all still alive. That never happened in that valley.
Yeah.
This is a joke. And then the documents wouldn't go anywhere. They would stop because we forget there was lots of gospels floating around.
Sure.
And people writing things and people are like, no, that doesn't make the cut because that event never happened.
Right.
The fact that the Apostle Paul is writing 20 years after the fact and he's able to make all these claims about things, the fact that the Gospels are written so early, some of them before the destruction of the temple in AD 70, and yet you have Jesus prophesying the destruction of the temple in AD 70.
Right.
You have all these amazing things. It just brings legitimacy over and over to the Gospels. And you can trust them. They're amazing. So, but here's the thing. Some people, when they read them, they get confused because they take a modern filter and they put them on the Gospels and say, well, what about this or what about that? And so they cast disparagements on them, but they shouldn't because the Gospels had their own rules of the way they would write and the way they would flow. So, for instance, you take the Gospel of John. So John takes the story of Jesus walking into the temple, which in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it comes at the end of his ministry just before he gets crucified. And he goes to the temple and he throws the table over, and he says, this place has become a wreck, blah, blah, blah. Matthew, Mark, and Luke put it right at the end of his ministry, the last time he walks into Jerusalem. John moves that story to John chapter 2. The second chapter of John, you have Jesus doing that.
He's leaving the wedding at Cana.
He's got the wedding,
blasting the temple apart.
Which,
the temple
to your point, those two stories are making the same point. Right? He goes to a wedding. He takes the Jewish purification stones. John tells us this. What are these stones used for? The rite of Jewish purification. The water, he turns them into wine. The very next story, he takes another Jewish ritual symbol, the temple, and he says, this is done. I'm not only the new wine, I'm also the new temple.
Right.
And so John has the ability and the flexibility to move these stories around so that he makes a point. Another example of this is Mark. Mark loves to write what scholars call Markan sandwiches. So he'll give you a piece of bread. He'll throw a story that's the meat of the story in the middle. Then he'll come back to the bread, and you're supposed to see it as all one story. So Jesus walks up to the tree. This is only in the Gospel of Mark that it goes this way. In Matthew's Gospel, Jesus walks up to a tree, curses it. It withers. The disciples go, what's that about? He goes, well, this tree's garbage. It's never going to bear fruit again.
Yeah.
Then he goes into the temple and he throws over the stuff at the temple. In Mark, he goes up to the tree, curses it, leaves, goes to the temple, curses it. They come back out of the temple, they go to the tree and they go, what happened to the fruit? And he says, this will never bear fruit again.
Sandwich.
The point we're supposed to go, the same thing that happened to the tree is going to happen to the temple. It's not bearing fruit, it's going to be destroyed. And we're supposed to see a Mark. Mark has the freedom.
The same thing's going to happen possibly to the people of God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the temple and everything it represents.
Yeah.
And Mark has this freedom to move these stories around.
Yeah.
We can't put our modern thing. And the other thing is I talk about in here is I draw on a couple of scholars where they talk about like when you see discrepancies in the parables or teachings of Jesus, and in one gospel he says it this way, but another he says it this way, we get all upset and go, oh my goodness, let's throw our Bible out. The disciples were making this religion up, and we forget to realize that Jesus did these parables multiple times over 3.5 years. He's walking around to villages. You know, you've used the same sermon illustrations.
He wanted them to repeat them.
Yes. That's the Semitic way. That's how you... And so he tells the story. So if you would have had a tape recorder, maybe Luke is using the version he did when they were in Capernaum, and Matthew's using the version he did when they were over here 2 weeks later. That's why the discrepancies are there. And all of this, while we look at it and go, I struggle with it, historians look at it and say, man, this is what legitimizes the Bible. So,
you'd said a moment ago about a modern lens.
Yeah.
Something that when I was in Israel I learned was just about the idea of patterns, cyclical, like how you said the sandwich. Another way to look at that is like, maybe our Western culture is obsessed with chronological order, and maybe John was like, I just want you to understand the divinity of Christ.
Yes,
and so I'm going to start with Logos. I'm going to start with these things. And you know, moving this to the beginning of his ministry actually helps you understand my main point.
Yes.
Which is that he is more than a man.
Yes.
He's the God who became a man, not the man who became a God.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Maybe he looked at, Mark, and he's like, I just think that, we need to make sure people will get this.
Yes.
And so like you said, the synoptic gospels, they share a lot of the same details, but every one of those authors had an agenda. He's like, I want you to understand that, maybe Matthew's thing is like Jesus is the new Israel, or maybe he's the kingship of, whatever it is. And maybe, Mark is, I don't know, the power of God or something. I don't know, there's probably
it's the suffering servant of Isaiah presented in Mark, And
then Luke is like, I interviewed Mary, the mother of Jesus. This is what she said.
Yeah, he's doing a whole historical thing. And the beautiful thing is you look at these stories and you realize they do have their authorial intent. They do have different points they're trying to make.
I love that we have four gospels.
I know.
That's so awesome. Imagine we only had one.
I know.
That's so cool that we have four different ones.
And you shouldn't struggle when you read. So some people say, you read the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, and Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven, and then you read it in Luke, and he says, the kingdom of God. What's the deal? And it's because Matthew had a Jewish audience, and if every time he said God, they'd have to stop and wash themselves, so he says heaven. So then the question is, okay, what did he really say?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, he said both.
Yeah.
He went around, and sometimes he'd say kingdom of God, sometimes he'd say kingdom of heaven, depending on his audience.
Yeah.
But also, let's let this blow our mind for a second, and this is what's great about it. He's not speaking English. Okay, so we know that. But not only isn't he speaking English, most of the time he's probably not speaking Greek.
Right.
Which is what I had to do 3 years of Greek. You probably had to take Greek when you were doing your studies.
A little bit.
So I'm reading the Greek because that's what the original manuscripts are written in Greek, right? Jesus went here. He said,
that's a translation of probably his Aramaic.
Translation when he's talking Aramaic.
Yeah. So you go, phileo love versus agape love, and I'm like, hold on a minute. I don't think Jesus said phileo or agape.
Right, he's saying the Aramaic. Talitha kuum, arise. I love when they give us the little Aramaic.
Or apapathach, when he says to the...
Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? And Mark will just like stop and tell us this is what it means.
When he says be opened, remember? It's like...
yeah. But
I love those. Is it possible that he spoke Greek, though? Because
he probably spoke Greek as well.
Yeah.
But I
don't think he's teaching Jewish people in Greek.
Yeah, I'm thinking. I mean, and they would have probably known. We're
nerding out right now. We are really
not to
nerding
critique. No, I think it's not to critique Americans. Most Americans don't know more than one language. Some of you will learn Spanish. Canadians, you learn French and English growing up. If you live in Europe, you know multiple languages. Most people you meet who born and raised in Europe, they'll know French and English or German and whatever. So you have all these. That's probably what it was like. Most people probably knew Greek and Aramaic, and Jesus probably could have gone between the both, or Latin or whatever was going on. But because Pontius Pilate, like when you watch the Passion of the Christ, right? That film, when Pontius Pilate's talking to him, he's talking in Latin. He's talking because he's Italian. And so there's like Italian, there's Latin, there's Aramaic, there's Greek. All of that's being spoken in the movie. And then you get all subtitles and your brain can't figure out what it is. But it's interesting because I'm thinking as Pontius Pilate's talking to him, he's speaking to him not in Aramaic.
Right.
And Jesus is kind of understanding I just had this fascinating, like last time I watched it, I'm like, that's interesting. Jesus obviously knows all the languages. Yeah. He knows everything. So anyways, all that to say, that's the beauty, and it sounds complicated, but it's not complicated. Right. It's actually it's the way it is.
It's the way the world was.
It's the way the world was, and it doesn't need to put you in a mode of I can't trust the Bible because he didn't say that word over here. It's 3 years, multiple times, different languages. The Holy Spirit guided the writing of these documents. Extant manuscripts legitimize them. History legitimizes. Answer, you can trust it.
How do I trust the Gospels if they were written after they died? That's a great answer to that, man. So, and you said in this book there's more of that?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Lots of that, yeah.
Last question. Is AI the Antichrist? Is AI the Antichrist? Artificial intelligence.
Big topic. You have it on your phone.
Chatty Patty, are you there?
Right here, Justice. What's up?
How would you answer the question, is AI the Antichrist?
I'd say that AI, like any technology, is a tool created by humans. The concept of the Antichrist in Christian theology refers to an end times figure opposing Christ, which is a very different matter. AI itself doesn't have beliefs.
No, that's wrong. That's not even true. AI is not
intention.
Yeah, and also AI is not necessarily a figure, it's a spirit, right? It's an idea.
Right.
So Antichrist. The Antichrist is not necessarily a figure, right?
Yeah, John says there's been many Antichrists.
Yeah, so
there's always some kind of Antichrist ideology or posture in an empire, whether that was the Roman Empire when he was writing Revelation or every empire since.
And so the first 6 chapters of Daniel, and then you look at Revelation.
Yeah.
This is it's what's considered apocalyptic.
Yes.
As a genre.
Yes.
Right. Genre. Right? So we got a few different genres in the literature of Scripture, right? We got poems.
Yeah.
We got, like you said, this. I don't know if there's any apocalyptic writings left. Is that even a? Is that?
What do you mean left?
Is there any genres still like that? Do they still have those?
Oh well, the closest thing would be like fantasy, like Tolkien.
Really? You would say
there's like beasts and wizards, and it's like it's metaphors, and it's not reading the newspaper.
What are the other genres
in the Bible?
Yeah.
Well, you got letters, you got narrative, you have poetry. Apocalyptic, epistle, which would be letter, gospels. Prophets is a mix between narrative and apocalyptic.
Gotcha.
And
what are the apocalyptic ones?
So apocalyptic would be Isaiah, parts of Isaiah, Ezekiel, obviously the book of Revelation, parts of Daniel. Those would be the huge apocalyptic literature where it's being written purely out of a symbolic world. Yeah. You're not supposed to take this literal. Right. Everything down to the numbers is it's metaphors, it's imagery, it's
And what's important about that, and I think this should be like fundamental to anybody studying the Bible, is that the Bible cannot mean what it never meant.
Yes.
So
that's good.
You have to understand that there are definitely parts that are supposed to be taken literal.
Yes.
The resurrection of Jesus, literal.
Yes.
That is not a parable.
No.
Right? But at the same time, there are parts where it talks about a dragon in Revelation.
Yeah.
And we don't know if that's an actual dragon or if that's representing somebody in power who's acting like a dragon, and that's a metaphor for a
that's what
dragon.
it is.
Yeah,
because in the first century, D.A. Carson, he's great on this.
D.A. Carson, yeah, I've heard him lecture.
D.A. Carson, he's a New
incredible.
Testament scholar,
yeah.
great guy. He talks about, he used to teach the book of Revelation to his class at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School in Chicago.
Interesting.
He would get them to read 300 pages of first century apocalyptic literature as a genre before they ever walked in the door to take his class in the book of Revelation. Because by the time they walked in, they were so immersed in the images of the day. A beast always represented an empire. This always represented this. This always represented that. So by the time they're open Revelation, they're like, oh, this is familiar because it's a genre that exists at the time. There's trumpets and there's angels and there's this and
do you know off the top of your head some of those would you just briefly be able to break down?
Well, a beast would be an empire.
Okay. An empire.
Every time. Yeah, a beast would be an empire. So it's always, so when you read about the beast on the 7 hills, the 7 mountains, in the first century, the Roman Empire, Rome, was known as the city on 7 hills.
Okay.
So it's literally the Roman Empire.
Okay.
Well, John's writing it, and this is what's beautiful about the book of Revelation. It's not some book about some group of people right at the end of time that need to hold on and not get the mark of the beast on their hand as a literal computer chip so that you can buy watermelons at the grocery store.
Yeah.
This is a book written to people in the midst of persecution of the empire. And the question of the book, both then and now, is, are you going to be a person of the empire, or are you going to be a person? Are you going to follow the beast or the lamb? Are you going to, and here's the thing, you ask the question of 666, well, he tells the name of a man. Most scholars now would go, it's a Nero image, a Caesar Nero image, where you couldn't do business. And what was the right hand? It was what you did. What was the forehead is what you thought. So here was the question of the 666. And this is why, if all we think it is a literal computer chip in your hand of some small group of people at the end of time where we missed the point of it, because that means you're looking to get, I don't want to get the mark of the beast. I don't want to get the mark of the beast. Maybe you already have it because you act and think like the empire versus Jesus. So the question has always been, you said earlier, it can't mean what it couldn't mean.
Yeah.
Well, it can't mean, it had to mean something that the people that John was writing to. First century believers getting persecuted and killed by the Roman Empire. How do you hold on to Jesus so that the beast will never, you will never give your allegiance to the beast. You will never become a person who worships the religion of power. And all. So
a little quip, a little pithy statement we give our Bible college students is the Bible was written to you, but it wasn't written. The Bible was written. The Bible wasn't written to you, but the Bible. A little quip, a little.
Let's retake that.
A little pithy. Let's do that one again. The Bible was not written to you, but it was written for you. What you're describing is something that transcends every people group, every audience that will ever read.
100%.
You could already be choosing the beast, like you said,
now,
over choosing the lamb.
Yes,
that is so beautiful. What you just said.
That's what makes it relevant to every people group. So when it says 7 years there was a symbol for that. Do you know that there's not 3 verses strung together in the book of Revelation that don't have a direct quotation or an allusion to the Old Testament?
I did not know that.
Think about that. So how are you going to understand the book of Revelation if you haven't figured out the Old Testament? 4 or 5 major influences.
That's a certain audience. You're writing to a certain people.
Right. Genesis, Exodus, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Daniel. 5 biggest influences on the book of Revelation.
Yeah.
You haven't immersed yourself in those.
Yeah.
Then you come to the book of Revelation and you start trying to figure out 1,000 this and 3.5 that and all this, it's symbolic.
Yeah.
So 1,000 represented infinity. 144,000, 12 times 1,000. 12 tribes of Israel. That meant completeness to a Jew. 1,000 meant infinity. All these things. Or else you've got 144 literal 1,000 people that are doing this. No, in fact, if you read it, here's another example of that. If you read it, I love this. So in Revelation 4 and 5, Jesus, I forget if it's he hears or he sees, but he hears the lion say something, and he turns and he sees a lamb. or it might be the opposite. And what you're supposed to read as an audience is they're the same thing. He hears something and he turns and he sees something, and that thing is the same. It's the lion and the lamb together.
Okay.
Same thing happens in Revelation 7. He hears the number is 144,000, and he turns and he sees a people group of a myriad of every tribe, tongue, and nation. And you're supposed to pick up these things that he's seeing and he's hearing, and they're the same thing.
So it can't possibly be a literal 144,
right, that's what I'm saying.
because the whole point of that seeing and hearing is that it's endless.
That's what I'm saying. So the book works beautifully
endless,
and has a cycle, and you get to chapter 7, and then the trumpets, and then you get to the last seal, and that opens up the next thing. It's a world.
I just tell people,
beautiful.
Read the first chapter and stop. Just read Revelation 1.
1, 2, and 3 are beautiful.
It's just like, this is who Jesus is.
Yes, I
love
love
it's
that.
Like, let's worship him.
Yes.
You know, because sometimes I think, we look at Jesus and I always, it's like, close your eyes and picture Jesus. And some people will straight up go, I picture him on the cross and he's disappointed in me. Yes. And he's got the crown of thorns and he's crying. And I'm like, that's what you picture Jesus is right now? Go read Revelation chapter 1.
Yes.
Let's look at
Jesus.
Who Jesus is right now.
Yes.
With the sword coming out of his mouth and holding the stars, and he's so bright that you can't even look at him.
White hair.
And fall down to the ground.
Amazing.
Yeah, so
I love that.
The sword coming out of the mouth. So you said beast. That's one thing.
The sword coming out of the mouth, it can't be literal.
Right.
You cry, hey guys, what are you doing out here?
Yeah.
It's like,
it can be literal because my son has a Bible that's made by, it's called the Brick Bible, and it's Legos. So it's the Bible with Lego imagery.
All right.
And let's read Revelation in the Lego Bible. And I'm just going to tell you, there's definitely a literal sword coming out of Jesus' mouth. And there's a bunch of skull Legos laying all over the floor. And there's a dragon of Legos. And my son's like, I don't know if I want to read this before I go to bed. I don't know if this is comforting me. But if you actually read Revelation 1, it's supposed to comfort you. It's supposed to bring you to your knees.
Yeah, of course.
It's like, this is who Jesus is. God is in control. He reigns and rules over all things. Like,
I love it.
But tell me about the sword. What do you think that is? That just represent the word?
It says it represents the word of God. Like so sometimes.
So the message.
Sometimes John will just tell you what it means. Here's what I love about Apocalyptic Literature.
Can you do the symbols, though? I'm asking you to do symbols. How many symbols do you know what they represent, just to help somebody? You said beast was one, and I'm asking you about the sword. Is that the word?
Sword is the word of God.
Sorry I didn't prep you for this, but I'm just trying to I want to know what the pregnant lady is. There's a pregnant lady. There's a lady going into birth in the stars. I want to know what that one is.
That's the covenant community of God in Revelation 12, giving birth to the Israel community, giving birth to the Messiah Jesus.
Okay.
And the beast is trying to kill the church. The beast turns its attention toward the baby and its followers and tries to kill it, flood the earth, kill. This is the persecution of the church coming out of the woman from chapter 12. Because
but that could be Herod.
Of course.
And it could be.
Listen to the symbol. You have the beast or the lamb. You have the woman of chapter 12 or who? The whore and the beast. Which woman do you belong to?
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
Hold on. 2 cities. New Jerusalem and what? Babylon.
Wow.
Which city do you belong to? Do you belong to Babylon of 18, or do you belong to the New Jerusalem of chapter 21? All of these things are giving you these options. Who do you follow? Who are you a citizen of?
Wow.
So you look at, I'll give you one last example of this. So you read chapter 21 and 22 of the book of Revelation in some translations. Instead of saying, I saw the New Jerusalem, and it was a city that was a cube, and it was 12,000 cubits by 12,000 cubits by 1,000 cubits, whatever it is, which makes a perfect temple cube box thing, whatever.
Yeah.
Obviously, the symbols are there, right? We have the 12s again that we've heard 14 different times through the book of Revelation. We've got the thousands in there. We've heard a ton through the book of Revelation. We're 21 chapters in now. We've started to figure out these symbols, the completeness, the perfection. But you read some translations of the Bible, and they're like, well, nobody knows what a cubit is. So now they translate it, and they go, I saw a city. It was 3,128 kilometers long by 1,472 kilometers. And you're like, no. See, that's where we've misunderstood what we're reading.
Yeah.
We're not reading a measurement.
Right.
The measurement means something.
Right.
And it means this is the perfect city. of perfection. It's the temple within the temple. It's the, all the symbolism that we've already got for 21 chapters because we're good readers of stories. And then we go, well, no one's going to understand that, Tom. Better give them the miles. And we're like, no.
It's talking about how God's restoring all things to the way he intended.
Yes.
He made it good.
Yes.
You could almost say perfect, and then we screwed it up.
Yes.
The Bible doesn't say the word perfect. It says good.
Yeah.
But then,
that's right.
But then Revelation 21 is when the new Jerusalem comes, when God restores all things. So it can't be a cubic measurement. It has to be talking about the return to perfect or return to the original design.
Yes.
So now all things are being made complete.
Yes.
Right? So when he says no more tears, he's saying because there's tears in the old version, and now there's no tears in the new version, right?
Or he says at one point in the book of Revelation, he says, where there is no longer any sea.
Yeah, what's that about?
So think about that. Either God, we're not going to have beautiful oceans like the Pacific Ocean.
I doubt that.
Or what was the sea to an ancient person? It was a thing of terror.
Yeah.
It took everybody's family. It would kill you. It was chaos.
Poseidon.
The mythology of Genesis 1 comes out of these ancient gods who, would create creation, and the seas would destroy, and all the ships, and like I was on a cruise in the Mediterranean last year, a massive cruise ship, and our ship was moving at 1 o'clock in the morning so much that my daughter's like, we're gonna die. And I'm like, I don't even disagree with you. We might actually die right now. And we're in the Mediterranean, like where Paul used to go around to the Cyprus and all that. And I'm on a cruise ship in 2024. In the ancient world, the sea, when you went out on the sea,
it was the unknown.
Man, it was unknown.
Yeah.
It was scary. It was.
You don't know what's under there.
And the beast, of course, comes out of the sea.
Godzilla.
Revelation 13. It's right. It's like it's chaos. It's empire. It's evil. And so what he says is there will no longer be any sea. It could be the case that God says there's no more oceans. It could be. We can't challenge that if that's what heaven is. But what he's trying to say is there's no more chaos. There's no more destruction and death. There's no more taking your father as he tries to cross over to get some bread. There's no more the place where the beast rises out of, the Roman Empire trying to kill you. All of that is gone.
You make me want to read Revelation
world.
Right? Real quick, if I'm going to read Revelation again, I'm saying Revelation, not Revelations.
Yes, please. It is
one
singular.
Revelation.
Yes.
Is there anything that you'd recommend? Is there anything in this about this?
There's a little bit in there about apocalyptic literature. Yeah.
Okay.
I actually talk in there about the Gospels because when Jesus says the Son of Man will come riding on clouds, that's a whole other podcast. He doesn't actually mean he's going to be physically riding on clouds. It's a throwback to Daniel chapter 7 and the apocalyptic literature, and he's trying to invest the destruction of the temple with a certain theological significance. All of that's in there.
But what about the tattoo on his leg, and what about him stepping on the unrighteous and the blood on the hem of the garment and all that?
But resources for the book of Revelation.
Hit that real quick. Real quick, hit that.
What? All of those have meanings.
Trumpet blows and he goes and the hem of the garment has the blood on it.
Yeah,
and
he's coming back in judgment. He's coming back, and the great thing about that. Sometimes we downplay the judgment of God. We downplay but we can't because. So here's what's really important about retaining a theology of the judgment of God. Romans chapter 12, Paul says, return evil with good. Vengeance is the Lord's, right? Let him repay. Mm-hmm. And that is very important because the only way, you and I sit here and we drink our little lattes and we go, oh, Kierkegaard, and I don't like a God of judgment or whatever. Go to a village where people get raped and killed and destroyed every day. You're not going to lose sleep over a God of judgment. And Miroslav Volf says exactly this. He says the only way you can repay evil with good and pray for your enemy versus retaliate against them, he says this, is if you have a theology that theologizes violence. So it means the only way I can return evil with good is I know that God is going to do violence. Yeah. God is going to bring vengeance and judgment, which lets me love my enemy versus have to kill my enemy. That's the only way to do it. So I think those chapters in Revelation are saying there's not only salvation coming, there is judgment coming as well. And Jesus is serious against sin. He's serious against sex trafficking. He's serious against people who do stuff to kiddos. He's serious against all these things, and he's coming in judgment against those things.
Because he's just.
Because he's just.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful thing. come back to your other question. Resources for the Book of Revelation or these
top one or two you'd recommend?
So N.T. Wright's always great with this stuff, but specifically about Revelation, here's what I would say. Darrell Johnson's book, Discipleship on the Edge. That's number one.
Okay.
That's a writer from Vancouver, pastor. He's in his mid-70s. He wrote that book 5 years ago.
What if we don't trust people from Canada?
Genius. He's American.
Okay.
Discipleship on the Edge, number one. Secondly, Eugene Peterson's book, Reversed Thunder. Reversed Thunder. That's how you're going to think through the book of Revelation spiritually. It's genius.
What an awesome
Amazing.
title.
Oh, Reversed Thunder. Well, it comes from a George Herbert poem, and it comes from a reflection on the prayers of Revelation 8. They go up into heaven, and the prayers are in a bowl.
Right.
And they're going up in front of God, and
like
the angels turn the bowl, and they come back down to earth, and they hit earth with lightning and thunder. And George Herbert says, like reversed thunder, our prayers impact history.
So cool.
They come back down and, whatever.
And that's Eugene Peterson?
Eugene Peterson, Reverse Thunder. And then...
You'll like him too, by the way. He's a pastor. He's got an easy read.
He's amazing.
I bet you the book's not even that big.
Reverse Thunder is pretty small, but the writing is... He was one of the first writers I ever read that said, I want to be a writer. I want to be a writer. And Reverse Thunder was a big part of that. Beautiful. Yeah. And it helps you like devotionally even too. It's not just...
He just passed away a few years ago. He's
G.B. Carrott's commentary, I think Craig Keener has a guy. The big commentary for the scholars out there, Greg Beale, B-E-A-L-E. He has the most like trusted commentary on the Book of Revelation in regard to a lot of it's a slog. Yeah. I think there's actually it's called a shorter commentary on the Book of Revelation from Beale. I think
that's enough.
I think Craig Keener has one. There was one, but there was one other Book of Revelation. Okay, Matt Chandler actually just wrote a book called Overcomers. I haven't read it, but that goes through the Book of Revelation.
You haven't read
as well,
it. How you can recommend it?
Well, Chandler's a great thinker.
So we're wrapping it up. Is AI the Antichrist? And I think understanding what the word Antichrist means is going to help you.
Yeah, I think so. Let's just jump to AI for just a quick second. So I think there's obviously, just to jump to the conclusion, I'd love to hear what you have to think or have to say. I think AI can be a tool. It has all these wonderful things that we're getting stuff done faster. We're doing summaries and it's amazing. But we can do with sermons. I can speak any language. You can just make my mouth move, and we can put you up on a video screen. And all of a sudden, you're talking languages I could never talk.
That's not Antichrist.
All these amazing things to spread the gospel. Church has been late adopters all the time. We need to not be afraid of new technologies. Yada yada yada. I believe all that. I do also hesitate a little bit with I'm a T2 guy. I know Skynet's learning things. And do I think it's outside the realm of possibility that this turns on us one day? No, I don't think that's outside the realm of possibility. Obviously, we have control over it still, but it'll start to trick us a little bit. And we are computers in the end, and there can be influence. I've
heard people talk about AI. Sorry to interrupt you, but as the potential to be demonic.
Yeah, I think the internet has the potential to be demonic. Money has the potential to be demonic.
Yeah.
I think it can learn some things and do some things. Here's, and I talk about this actually in The Problem of Life. I have a section on transhumanism, and talk about, because obviously it's a book about being human and so on. Like, what's the next stage of our evolution?
Yeah.
And
I read today Neuralink can now be paired to Elon Musk's whatever the new robots are.
Yes,
you can use a Neuralink to control a robot.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and I talk
cybernetics.
Right. So I talk about Neuralink in the book a little bit, and the first guy who got it, and he was paralyzed and can think through chess and all that. And is this human? And then I talk about Yuval Harari wrote a book called Sapiens, and right at the end he talks about transhumanism and where human beings are going and how he's a little scared about it. And then John Lennox in a book called 2084 picks up on Harari stuff, and he makes this fascinating, or it might be Harari that does it, but they both interact with each other. They make this fascinating point about being human in the future. And they say this, and I thought this was fascinating. He said, here's a problem. We're going to create what Harari calls, over time, we're going to create a useless class. And what the useless class will be because robots and, we don't need our social media people in church as much as we used to, right? We don't. A thing could cut all our clips, do all of everything. AI can now do it in seconds. What we used to pay a guy 8 hours or a gal 8 hours a week to do can now be done in 20 seconds. 14 different sermon clips with posts. So Don't need that job. Don't need that job. Don't need that job. Don't need that job. Over time, what he says was going to happen is society is going to have a useless class. They will not know how to contribute. They won't know what to contribute. And then Lennox makes a point. We've already seen this. The Roman Empire had a useless class because 65% of the Roman Empire were slaves. And the slaves would do everything for the culture, so much so that the culture became useless. And then he says this, so that when the Roman Empire fell, no one knew how to rebuild it. That's the fear. Imagine we get to a place where we're so useless, we don't even know how to contribute anymore, so that when culturally we crumble, nobody knows how to think or act utilitarian enough to figure our way out of it. I think those are some like meta fears about the future of all of this. I just think we need to move backwards and start thinking.
I guess I'm having a hard time.
What are some of the implications?
Trying to follow what that would look like. I mean,
yeah, I
can see it. I guess a little bit, but yeah.
I mean, it's a bit of a stretch, but it's a bit of a warning to go.
Yeah.
How far do you go with transhumanism?
Yeah.
If you read the fall narrative as a parable or a fable for robots and the human experience, it would be pretty clear what it's saying.
Yeah, the knowledge of good and evil.
Right. Like, hey, you can either have God over you and be cool with who you are and human limits, or you can try to go way higher than yourself and the way you were made, and you can go after this thing.
Bro. To think about the Genesis 3 like that, that's really nuts to think about that.
Yeah.
The choice to enter into that whole new realm.
Omniscience. I want to know more. I want to accomplish more.
Yeah.
I'm not happy with the limits of being an organic creature that doesn't know all things. Like I'm telling you right now, and I think you'd be the same. If I could get Neuralink for free and know everything on the internet in an instant, there's no way I'd do it. I would never want to instantly know things. That's why I want to read. And I think what I'm a little old school, right? So here's my problem. My problem is actually with the arts. I think art becomes useless, in my opinion. Some people disagree with me on this. I think
oh my gosh, if AI is writing all our songs? What
songs, paintings?
Yeah, it's a bummer.
Why is the Mona Lisa interesting? Because of who
Leonardo DiCaprio.
Leonardo, Da Vinci and who he was, and why is the Sistine Chapel? Because Michelangelo and all his political aspirations and his pain. Well, this is the story of their suffering and their pain. This is what makes it amazing.
Yeah,
I'm sitting out on the deck in Hawaii 2 years ago with my buddy. He introduces me to ChatGPT maybe a year ago, and I said, "What is this?" And he goes, "Oh, I can." Just give me some stuff. And I'm like, okay. He's like, just give me the most random stuff. So I'm like, I don't know. I'm like Chewbacca and a Ford Taurus or whatever. And he writes this most beautiful poem you've ever heard. And Chewbacca is in this Ford Taurus. I'm like, what the? And he said, give me something to paint. And I said, okay, well, do a painting of 10 caribous sitting around having a dinner at a Hawaiian sunset, just like we're having right now. 14 seconds later, the most beautiful abstract painting with these caribous. And I'm like, what the crap? And he's like, well, that's what it just did. And I'm like, and it means nothing to me. It means nothing.
Yeah. If your buddy had done it, you would admire the genius of God. You'd admire an image bearer who is reflecting God.
Through the grind. Through the pain.
But still, it's
through the difficulty.
Beautiful, so.
Synthetic isn't art to me. Now, I know this is we're going to all evolve. In 10 years, I'll sound like an ancient, like, you idiot. Don't you know the best 3 songs in the radio right now were all written on AI? And it's like, yeah, I still don't think I'm going to love it.
Yeah. Great answer, man.
Anyway, I don't think that's an answer. I don't think it's the Antichrist, like, on the nose.
Yeah.
There's been lots of people thought computers were the Antichrist, or some people thought.
All right, how about this? How about this? Let's end with you talking to the camera about fear, about the future.
Yeah. We're scared politically. We're scared about wars and rumors of wars. We're scared about the anxiety that we have. It's amazing to me that we have more medicine, more psychology, more technology than we've ever had, and we're more anxious. We're more depressed. We're more disconnected than we've ever been, because I think the solution is God, not you. I think the solution is not going inside of yourself and just finding yourself in a disenchanted world. It's about having a revolution of the soul that connects you to the God who made you, and you find your identity and purpose in him, and you move forward. And some of that fear, Jesus says, we're going to worry, but do not worry about tomorrow. You're borrowing worry when you think about all the things about tomorrow. If you have Christ, the Apostle Paul in Philippians chapter 4 talks about that I've been very rich and I've been very poor, and I've figured out a way to be content in both. And there's moments in your life where you look forward into the future and you think, I can't believe, I don't know if this is going to happen. I'm scared, I'm nervous, I'm fearful. And the Bible goes, man, that's not from God. God doesn't give you a spirit of fear. If your identity is in Christ, now your circumstances aren't the thing that define how you feel about life. You're holding on to someone who transcends all circumstances, so that even if the worst thing that could happen to you in the secular framework happened to you, which is death. Listen, here's what the gospel tells you. I said this to my church a bunch of years ago. I was getting on a flight and I was flying to Hawaii. And I hate flying. I don't love flying. And a 16-and-a-half-hour flight over the Pacific Ocean with no place to put this plane down if something goes wrong. And I looked at them and I said, I'm jumping on a plane tonight at 10 o'clock and I'm going to fly to, we're flying to Australia. We're going to fly to Australia, 16 hours. And here's what the gospel does not promise you, church. It does not promise you that I'm going to get there alive. It does not promise you that I'm not going to die. What it promises you is that I'm safe and dying. That's the difference. Every single one of us has fear of the things that are going to happen. The cancer diagnosis. Is the kid going to do well in life? Are we going to figure out the finances? What you get is not God who's everything's going to work out all the time. It's that from the eternal perspective, he's got you. And if you're in his hands, you never lose. That's why Paul can say to die is gain. And if that's your perspective, like we were talking about with the resurrection, and you move back from there, you're not going to fear death. You're not going to fear circumstances when they drop out from you, because your life doesn't have to be perfect. That's not what's promised. You're not necessarily going to be a winner. It's you make a good account of your life and you put your life in his hands, and he's got you.
If you weren't moved by that, and I don't know what to tell you, can I pray for you for a second? Just while we pray together, just say, Lord, help me with this fear. Lord, I know that the antidote here is actually trusting you, and that's going to require faith. There was once a man who asked God, well, I can't really believe, but I know you can help me with my belief. Help my unbelief, was his words. Maybe that's the prayer that you need to pray. Lord, would you help me trust you? I don't want to be a person of fear. I want to have a relationship with like what Mark described, where no matter what happens, I know that you're with me. So, Lord, I ask that you would grant that peace that you have to offer. Your son Jesus said, I can give you peace that the world cannot give you. And I pray that that peace would be known to you in the person of Jesus and your relationship with God. Amen.